Hello, this is Aaron Purdue signing in from the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was going to take you guys inside today and show you some of the exhibits regards ancient Native American history and their empire, because they used to have an excellent exhibit in their basement about this, pertaining to the discussion topic today. However, I just went in and toured the museum, and it's not what they used to be, so we are losing our history. It's indicative of things that are happening in today's culture because it's very important to the discussion I wanted to have today, which is about the bell curve that Thomas Sowell and Charles Murray talk about. So we're going to do this on the fly. So it's going to be another talk and drive unless I figure something out where we can go and take a look at some evidence of this, okay? So the Pueblo Indian culture here in New Mexico, this is kind of a neat place to live because you can see evidence of an ancient empire here in this state, okay? And to the southeast of me, about an hour and a half away, is Gran Cuevara at Salinas, which from about the time of Christ up until the Spanish arrived was a major city. It was actually one of the largest cities in the world. And it was at the time, or it was at the juncture where the Pueblo Indian Empire, the ancient Pueblo Indian Empire was. And because they follow pretty much the southern Rocky Mountains, the Colorado Plateau, into the Sonoran Desert, and or that empire spanned that distance. And it was where that culture met with the Plains Indians culture, and they did a lot of trading. That was kind of like their, for lack of a better term, even though there was no waterfront there, that was kind of like their East Coast or their eastern boundary, right? So that would be like their New York City. And the history documents indicate that this was a massive city. Chaco Canyon's about 3 hours to my northwest. It's not that far, but the roads to the mountains and stuff like that cause it to be a 3-hour journey. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was something that Thomas Sowell and Dr. Charles Murray discussed when they were talking about, Dr. Charles Murray calls it the bell curve, where, and this is often interpreted as racist, and it could be used for racist purposes. How certain demographics, test at different points on the IQ bell curve. So, for example, Native Americans test here, Asian Americans test here, Black Americans test here, white Americans test there. So, it's a discussion about where different demographic groups corporately test, on standard IQ tests, right? It's what's known as bell curve. However, both Dr. Sowell and Dr. Murray both indicate that these demographic indications are not static. I hate doing this video on the fly because I really was expecting the museum to have some of their old exhibits, but it's not. It's been, for lack of a better term, it's been gentrified because it's really sad. It really is sad because you used to be able to go down. When you would go into the museum, you would start at one point, and they'd have a short little video and some art exhibits, and some oral history and stuff like that. And then you would go down into the basement, and there was a lot of archaeological stuff there. There were models of like ancient cities there, stuff like that. And it's been a while since I've been to this museum, so it's my fault for not doing my homework properly. But up until I discovered today, that would have been the perfect place to go to have this discussion. So now we're just, and for you guys to have the receipts. So now we're going to have to do this on the fly, right? So, in the ancient Puebloan culture, it's a group of Native Americans that have been here in this region for, well, depending on what creation scale you want to use, they've been here since probably right after the flood of Noah, for those of us who are religious people. They have found east of here Clovis points at Clovis, New Mexico, that have indicated the presence of these people here for several thousand years, okay? And their cultural evolution is pretty much contemporary with the cultural evolution of the Middle East. So, the time that I want to talk to you about today is mostly has to do with from about just before the time of Christ, so contemporary to the Roman Empire, up until about 1500. So during the European Middle Ages, if you will. And while Europe was going through their dark ages, there was a massive empire here in the American Southwest that stretched from near the Colorado-Wyoming border on the north side, south to the Durango, Chihuahua border in Mexico, and the Sonora, Sinaloa border in Mexico, west to the Sea of Cortez, or the Gulf of California, up that coast to the Colorado River Delta, up the Colorado, or the western boundary, then would be the Colorado River, to about where Boulder City, Nevada is today, and then trending northeastwards towards about Salt Lake City, Utah, and then of course eastward across or just south of the Wyoming-Colorado border. And this was what was known as the ancient Puebloan Empire. It consisted of primarily the Puebloan peoples, but the ancient Puebloan peoples, what they would call Pueblo 1, Pueblo 2, and Pueblo 3, are currently living in what they would call Pueblo 5, as far as that timeline is concerned. And in these cultures, or out of these cultures came several distinct people groups. The Tohono O'odham of Arizona and northern Sonora, Mexico. The Hopi, the Zuni, the three different Pueblo groups that are here in New Mexico. The Tarahumara, who used to be the ancient Mogollon of southwestern Mexico, southeastern Arizona, northern Chihuahua, and northeastern Sonora. They're now called the Tarahumara, who live primarily in the mountains of Chihuahua, Mexico. And the Pascua Yaqui people of Arizona and Sonora, and probably some of the Paiute in Utah and portions of Nevada, okay, and western Arizona. So this empire at its zenith, its capital city was Chaco Canyon. If you go and you look at Chaco Canyon and look at pictures of it, it was a massive structure. At its zenith, it was probably close in size to Babylon. And my whole point in this discussion is that a demographic that typically tests low on today's bell curve, at that point in time, if we were to administer the IQ test across demographics while these cultures were in their zenith, they, of course, would probably test at the top of the bell curve. Hold on a minute, I'm going to order me some lunch.
Thank you for choosing McDonald's today. Are we using the mobile app?
Yes, can I have a number 7 with a large Sprite, please?
Anything else today?
That's it.
Total $8.51 first window.
Thank you. Lunch on the fly. So, anyways, they had technology contemporary with the ancient Romans, the ancient Babylonians, on that same scale, okay? They had massive road systems. So, the intelligence of demographic groups is not, it's static, it's not fixed, okay? It's dependent upon certain factors. Hold on a minute.
Sir, 851 your total on a call. You want to see today, bud?
No.
Okay, you're good to go. Have a good day, sir.
Mm-hmm. So, say for example, we would look at the Native American demographic today and how they're living today. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. One moment. Oh, there's some. Thank you, ma'am. And we would determine that they would be on the lower, corporately, they would be on the lower side of that bell curve. And that's largely determined upon the fact that, you know, there's certain environmental factors or cultural factors that are in play now that were not in play then. So, genetically speaking, it's possible that those individuals, given the right circumstances, given the right opportunities, given certain things, that they could go back to being at the top of that bell curve if the march of time were determined to do so. Okay? Now, the bell curve is largely used sometimes for nefarious interests who want to argue, well, this demographic is less intelligent or less capable than the other demographic. Therefore, our demographic is greater than them. and we're superior to them. That's not necessarily true. Because, mind you, the Puebloans had a massive, successful empire with complex architecture, complex trade networks, advanced mathematics, advanced technology, advanced medicine, advanced science, contemporary to when Europe was in the Dark Ages and they were stuck in feudalism and enjoying a much lower standard of living, right? So, at the time, it could be said, if we were to do the bell curve at that time, during the Dark Ages, when these people out here were at the zenith of their empire, and the Europeans were stuck in the Dark Ages, and we were to apply the bell curve today, well, then we could definitely say that the Puebloan people of the American Southwest and northern Mexico and the southern Rocky Mountains were a superior race than the white people in Europe, right? Right? So, there goes that argument that the bell curve is racist. All the bell curve does is report or it gives an indicator on the health of a demographic and their culture. Okay? And I think that's what it was intended to do. Shit. Make a mess. Damn it. Okay. That was disgusting. Mustard stain on my fucking jeans. Alright. It was really fun. So, what does that tell us about demographics today that are testing on that lower on that bell curve, right? What should we use that bell curve to do? Not to beat those people over the head or tell them that they're less than us because they're not meeting, or they're not at the same position on that bell curve as other demographics. No. That's probably not the right application. What we should look at is, okay, what's working over here? Can we apply it over there? Okay. What kind of cultural standards are working for this demographic group, whereas another demographic group appears to be struggling right now for whatever reason, right? Am I making a case for socialism? No, I'm not. Okay? Now, in my past videos, and I actually walked you through a smaller, the ruins of a smaller settlement north of here about a month and a half ago, where I explained to you that very similar things happened to Native Americans as did black people in recent history, around the same time, right? And I explained to you how by emasculating, the male figures in their culture, by enslaving them, by by certain things being done to them by the Spanish colonials, the Mexican plantation class, and later the American plantation class, how that's kind of set them back, right? And now through the bigotry of low expectations, those people groups are still reeling from some of the stuff that's been going on in their past. All right, so the Native Americans, just like African Americans, because they were held back for so long, even though their ancestors in the past, for example, black people's ancestors in Africa, we can look at them having, vast empires at some points in ancient history. Or Native Americans, such as the Puebloans here in New Mexico, we can literally get in a car or a truck and drive an hour and a half to 2 or 3 hours away from a major American city, or even 20 minutes to the north, and see evidence of their past prominence before those negative things happened to them. We could go back and say, all right, so all things being equal, if we are to give these people the equal opportunity, not equal outcomes, opportunity, as everybody else who happens to populate this bell curve, is it possible for them to eventually reach a par with their contemporaries on that bell curve? And the answer is yes. Obviously, when we can point to the history of their ancestors in comparison to other demographic groups who lived on this planet contemporaneously with them at certain periods of time, and see where they either matched or even exceeded at certain periods of time other demographic groups on this planet, okay, before we came together in this culture here. So the answer is obviously yes, okay? So how do we do that, all right? One of the things that I believe is negatively impacting certain demographic groups in this country is what I call the bigotry of soft expectations. So here's how the game is played. And again, I said this before and I'm going to say it again. Certain people, namely in the Democrat Party on the left, want to appear like they're apologizing for the sins of the past, so therefore we're going to give these people a leg up. We're going to give them welfare benefits. We're going to do things like Lyndon Johnson's 1965 war on poverty, right? And this is kind of snake oil, because what it appears to do is it appears to say, all right, well, because of your disadvantage from what happened to you recently in the past, we're going to give you free stuff and help you along, and even in some cases give you a preference over everybody else. But that actually is harmful to these people, because the only way to really move up on that bell curve is through having an equal opportunity to work hard and reap the rewards of reap the benefits of that work. So, say for example, each person, regardless of their skin color or heritage, is given at the day of their birth the equal opportunity and expectation that once they become an adult, that they would choose a means by which they could contribute to society in a capitalist society and have the unlimited potential to be diligent about their efforts and reap the benefits as along with serving their fellow man. So, equal opportunity and protection under the law. In his discussions on this topic, Dr. Thomas Sowell uses the example of the Ashkenazi Jews and the Italians in the late 19th century America, in which he says that in the 1890s, Ashkenazi Jews in the United States and Italian immigrants were testing on the low side, the very low side of this bell curve, whereas black people were slightly higher than them, white people were slightly higher than them. And Asian Americans, Asian immigrants also were testing very low on this bell curve. He indicates that within about one generation to two generations, that the Ashkenazi Jews, because of their work ethic and because of certain things that they did as they became a member of the society, once again tested on the bell curve, but after about 40 years they were actually testing above whites, non-Jewish whites, Gentile whites on the bell curve, and the Asian immigrants were testing even beyond them. The African Americans had fallen slightly, and the Italians were pretty much on par with their other European counterparts. So that there is proof that those bell curve results are static and that they're only a measure of an occurrence in a period of time. Okay? Then we could look at individuals. We could look at individuals like Frederick Douglass. We could look at who's the famous inventor, African American inventor? I can't remember his name right now. Last name is Washington. We look at individuals like them who, even though their contemporary group was testing rather low on the bell curve, they themselves were way on the higher side. So if genetics was purely the explanation of why people tested certain places on a bell curve, then those aberrations would not exist. Those individuals, whomever they were exposed to or participated in something that caused them to progress up that bell curve. Another thing that people like Sowell and Murray discovered was that individuals at different points of their life could test at different points on the IQ bell curve. What they found is that people who were more productive people, so say for example, a high-performing carpenter, a scientist, a high-performing machinist, a high-performing farmer, a high-performing steel worker, a high-performing doctor. Let's say they all tested on the IQ test at 6 years old, and as they pursued their careers, if they pursued them firmly enough, and if they were active enough in whatever they were doing, as time progressed, they actually tested higher on the IQ scale the more proficient they became in their trades. And not just higher in that particular section or the relative section of the IQ test, but on all segments, okay? This is where the bigotry of low expectations gets people. Because, okay, yes, somebody who says they love you, says they care about you, says they want to care for the disadvantaged, when they actually hand you stuff for nothing, they're actually hurting your potential and hurting your ability to excel. Okay? And as that happens, you actually lose intelligence. Versus, and this is going to sound so screwed up, But say versus somebody's picking on you all the time, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to fucking show them. And then you go out there and you work your ass off, and pretty soon you get to the point to where you can beat that other individual, that bully, at their own game. Y'all picking up what I'm putting down here, right? Because eventually you become stronger, smarter, more circumspect, more cunning than your oppressor. Okay? Now, is this a reason? Is this an excuse for us to do things like go back to Jim Crow? Of course not. Absolutely not. But this is a switch up that I think a lot of people don't catch, right? I was just now listening to a discussion between Glenn Beck and Dr. Phil. And Dr. Phil was using a term called political psychology, okay? And it's an apt term for this. So let's go back to the 1960s. Now remember, civil rights was pretty much wrapping up, and the culture was actually, and the cultural shift really started after World War II, but that cycle or that generation of culture had pretty much arrived at, okay, everybody's equal, doesn't matter skin color, all that other stuff, except for people like, you know, the Dixiecrats and the KKK people and a lot of people in the Democrat Party, right? So what they did is they're like, okay, well, we can no longer beat them by force or by struggle. They've already won that. So here's what we're going to beat them in, okay? Because these principles had been known for a while. This isn't something new I'm talking to you about it, as far as like the bell curve and how demographic groups and individuals can move up and down this bell curve over time. You know, they already knew this stuff. They're like, well, all right, so, you know, we oppressed them, and over time they actually got better, and now they kind of actually won their battle. But we're not going to give this up. What if we did this? What if we apologized profusely for what we did? And what if, in doing so, we said, okay, well, now we're going to make it up to you. We're going to lower the standards for you to attain certain things because we feel bad and we want to give you a leg up because of what happened in the past. Okay? What if we tell these people, look, we're gonna help you out with getting food, or getting housing. Okay? And they know that by doing this, you're taking away or you're subverting the inborn, almost instinctual thing that every human being has to go out and work and to provide their own sustenance. And they said, okay, if we do this, then over time, their mental acuity will actually diminish, because we know that people's mental acuity actually increases if they actually have to be exposed to challenges such as working for a living or, you know, solving problems either daily or over the span of their life in order to better their situation, or even for the means of survival. What if we made it to where those people didn't have to do that anymore? And if they don't do that, they'll actually become dumber. See? And then it'll be easier for us to sell them on ideas that will either keep them at a disadvantage or cause them to keep themselves at a disadvantage on their own, culturally. or that we could use because of their now generational lack of mental acuity to manipulate them, to get them to do what we want them to do. That's the bigotry of low expectations. That's what it causes, right? Kind of ties into the discussion we had last week about Francis Fox Piven and certain elites' desire to either exterminate certain demographic groups or to lead us back into feudalism and a case system where we go back into some sort of slavery, right? And the slave can only be a slave, really, as long as he doesn't know any better. So let's not talk about American slavery. Let's talk about the feudalism in Europe during the Dark Ages, right? Since we brought that up, let's talk about how, as long as those individuals were not furnished a formal education and they were kept in survival mode, they could remain the property, and they were the property of the Lord of the Manor. Okay? They were called tenants, but that's actually an inaccurate description because they occupied the land, and yeah, they paid a fealty towards the Lord of the Manor to use a portion of that land to grow their own food and stuff like that. But their primary purpose was to do two things: to work the land of the Lord and a labor pool from which he could draw things as soldiers if he had to go to war. A serf in the penal system couldn't do like we do today and say, for example, I wanted to date somebody across town, date somebody who's of a different race than me or whatever, and eventually marry them, even from a different country, right? Now, I have a freedom and choice to do that, and so does that other individual, right? We're free agents, right? No. A tenant, a serf of the Lord, in feudal times, in order to marry, in order to have children, in order to do anything, they had to have that individual's permission. Well, it sounds a whole lot like slavery to me. Okay, that's a case system. We call it slavery here, but in other countries it's called a case system, but that's exactly what it is. Alright? Now, the way that they kept those people in check until the Renaissance in Europe, and mind you, now we're talking different people groups. We're not talking about the Puebloans here in this region of the world, who at that time were actually in the midst of a huge and very successful empire until environmental factors made it almost impossible for them to sustain themselves. In Europe, under feudalism, up until the Enlightenment, the serf, the commoner, the slave did not have access to education. Almost all of them never went more than 5 miles from the manor house. Of course, they believed in all kinds of superstitions. They were all made to go to one church. That church happened to be held in a foreign language that they couldn't understand. They were just told they had to do these things. So, the bigotry of low expectations is what kept those people enslaved. Then we went to the discussion last week about the birthright of kings and all that other. That's literally how they use those things to justify. Okay, that's why our Republican system is such an anomaly. Because even though we started with a very racist system, where the Southern planter class, and even some planter classes in states like New Jersey or Delaware, parts of Pennsylvania, and even early on in this country's history, as far as New York and Vermont, right, parts of Massachusetts, even though we still had a remnant of feudalism in a very racist chattel slavery environment, and then out here in the American Southwest under the Spanish colonials and the Mexican system, the Mexicans and the Spaniards had these huge land grants that were worked and populated by Native American and black slaves here, and Irish slaves. Ergo the term gringo, which is a story within itself. There was still a trace of it, but the idea was being set forth that each man was an individual. Okay, I understand it took us the first 200 years to get it right. Okay, so it wasn't perfect, but at least the idea was there. The Enlightenment was growing. Okay, and eventually we got to the point to where, for a while, I still think it's largely the cultural norms once you back out of all this grievance politics bullshit and just deal with individuals as they are, that we recognize each man and woman as a sovereign, sentient human being on par with ourselves or our contemporaries. That's the way we should see it. But the bigotry of low or soft expectations, or what we call grievance politics, is created specifically to actually regress society back into feudalism. Okay, so why are we doing it with minorities? Because they're smaller people groups that we can do that to them first before we go after majority people groups, such as white people, okay? So let's talk about white people, all right? So yeah, most of them are in the middle class. There's a lot of black people and Hispanic people in the middle class too. But, they are the majority population in this country. And we're already kind of dogging on the minority people, like the black people and the Native American people, and a large portion of the Hispanic population by the bigotry of low expectations. So we're subliminally, not forcefully, but subliminally holding them back by getting them to buy into a bunch of stuff that really is not productive to them at all. So those are the minority groups. Those are the smaller people groups. But now we look at what's going on with the majority people group. And the Anchorman's even pointed this out. He's like, wow, it's spreading to white people too. Well, yeah, it is. Okay, and here's why. Because contrary to what people would tell you about perceived racism, those in the elite class even view lower class white people as inferiors. So eventually, once they get everybody else put in their pocket, they're going to put them in their pocket too. I told you last week, this is eventually going to go after everybody. Okay? See, feudalism, and Dr. Sowell points this out very succinctly, because the term slave comes from the word Slav, which means people from Eastern Europe, from Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, what used to be the Yugoslavia, so like Serbia, Herzegovina, Albanians, Ukrainians, and Southern Russians, or Western Russians. Those are Slavs. Okay, now what happened there? So the Byzantines and the Romans, a lot of the slaves that they captured from Europe, not from Africa, not from the Middle East. They captured people from there too. Enslaved people from there too. Yes, I got it. But a lot of the slaves that the Romans had, they took from what they called the barbaric tribes. So like the Scythians, the people north and west of Macedonia, and they called them Slavs, from which we got the term slave, okay? So that's, and of course you have feudalism during the Dark Ages, which was a form of slavery. Matter of fact, that's exactly what it was, right? On a massive scale. So ever since the Enlightenment, old money has always been trying to put this whole thing back in the box, okay? And yes, there's new money or newer money that's now old money now, but they've taken on that mentality. So they view all of us as dirty. And they want all of us on the lower end of that bell curve. Like I said, they want to go after the minorities first because they're smaller people groups. You attack, you eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? And then they'll go after, certain groups of white people like, maybe the poor redneck people in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. They'll go after them first. And they're squeezing the middle class now. Why? Because the mercantile class are uppity, right? And how dare, in their minds, how dare a black person or a Hispanic person or a Native American person break out of the stereotype that we've pretty much sold them on for themselves, because we supposedly already got them back in our pocket, okay? So they can't force us into chattel slavery anymore. But they can do the Klaus Schwab thing, right? You will own nothing and be happy. Dr. Sowell, and I watched the interview between John Stossel and Charles Murray this week, and this is actually where I got the topic, and I was like, this guy's not a racist at all. Because he makes it very abundantly clear that at various times in history, different demographics have actually moved from one place to another on that bell curve. And it makes it abundantly clear that that bell curve is an indicator of things that are going on in that culture, negative or positive, right? Dr. Sowell says the same thing, especially when he discusses the history of the IQ scores of Ashkenazi Jews and Italians and stuff like that, right? So they're all saying the same thing. White guy and a black guy saying the same thing. And I wonder where Dr. Sowell would have tested on that bell curve. You know what I'm saying? Dude, he's not even light-skinned. Dr. Sowell is pretty damn dark-skinned. For the black people who like to say, well, dark-skinned and... But no. It don't really fucking matter. It really doesn't. Because I promise you Dr. Sowell tests a lot higher on that scale than I do. And when I'm not in the sun, my skin looks like the underside of a goddamn fish belly, alright? So... we look at what's happening today. A lot of people that I listen to, they bemoan the degradation of their section of the culture. So, to this one individual, this is going to be addressed towards his audience primarily, all right? And I got a question for you. Which is more hateful and which is more racist? And think about the answer to this question. Which is more destructive? Which is more, which is more hateful? Which is more, which makes me a bigger enemy? Fair discussion, since I'm a white guy, let's pretend, alright? Let's pretend that I'm a racist white guy and I walk up to you and I call you the N-word. Okay? I just called you a name. Yes, that's very hurtful. That's very mean. It's very insulting. It's very disrespectful. It's horrible, right? And obviously you would rightfully want to either make me take an ambulance ride or a hearse ride. Maybe you would be right in feeling that, thinking that. You would even be right in trying to do it. Is that hurtful, or is it more hurtful for a bunch of guys like me to come to you and say, you know what, because of the color of your skin or because of your ancestry, we feel that you cannot do this on your own. So therefore, we're going to lower the standards here and we're going to give you free stuff here because we don't feel that you have the capability, for whatever reason, to do this for yourself. What's more racist? What's more hateful? You know, Heinrich Himmler was the chief, or one of the chief officers, I believe it's Himmler, of the Nazi propaganda machine, right? And he came out and he said one time, he said, I know that a lot of what I'm saying is probably not true. He said, but if you tell a lie to enough people and enough times, it eventually becomes the truth. He actually got that from Edward Bernays. Who's Edward Bernays? He's what's known as the father of marketing in the United States. So let's back away from the race discussion for just a minute, right? Let's say that Procter & Gamble makes a certain type of laundry soap. They make a lot of them, but Edward Bernays actually worked for Procter & Gamble, okay? So Tide is a product of Procter & Gamble, right? And most people swear by Tide laundry soap. They swear by it. But if you flip around and you read the ingredients of a Tide bottle and you go and you read the ingredients of a Game bottle or some of their competitors, you'll discover that the ingredients might be a little different, but for the most part, they're exactly the same. So you're pretty much getting the same product. Maybe one's slightly more concentrated than the other. Maybe one's got a different type of oxidant in it that works better than the other. But overall, it's pretty much the same. Okay? It's close enough. But why do people swear by Tide, right? Because when Bernays was working for Procter & Gamble, he sold them on the idea of advertising. And the idea of advertising is this, right? You tell people something enough times, even if it's half true, slightly true, or even if it's not completely true at all. What if Gain is the better detergent, and Tide knows this, and they know they're selling you a lie, but if you keep telling them Tide is the best laundry detergent, guess what? And you tell it to them over and 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 over again, they're going to swear by Tide. So, over 50 years, a lot of people who look like me have been telling a lot of people who are darker than me, well, because of your heritage, because we feel so bad, and because of your heritage, we don't feel that you're able to do this on your own. So, here's some housing. You know, we're gonna, and everybody else in this institution has to get a 4.0 grade average to matriculate here. But for you, we're gonna make it a 3.0 for you. And, you know, you really need our help because you're so disadvantaged. And they keep telling you that for 50 years. Over and 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 over again. Not only are they dissuading you from participating in the very thing that will actually make you smarter and stronger and more independent, which is setting you out there completely by yourself, or, only with the help of natural social support systems such as a family or a group of friends and your industrial peers or whatever, right? Instead of setting you in that natural setting, they're actually softening the pillow for you. And they've got you believing that lie. And because you're not allowed to do that, you're not working your mind muscle, right? So, you get a couple generations of this. And that mind muscle is weaker and weaker. That cultural muscle, which is part of the mind muscle, it's weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. It's just like a guy, I know, right? The belly on me. Still work out, but not as much as I need to. There's reasons for it. Well, it's just like a guy. You ever notice these bodybuilders who, once they quit working out real hard, they quit the gym altogether, they get fucking fat as shit, right? Soft. And they got the muscle memory. If they just get back in the gym, they could actually get in shape pretty goddamn quick. For a while. If they let themselves go for too long, they're actually in worse shape and worse health than somebody who never stepped in the gym in the first place. Now, is going to a gym a good thing? Yes, absolutely. And while they were doing that, they were stronger and faster and leaner and meaner and more capable than their peers until they stopped. And then a decade or two later, the peer that they were beating or that they were competitive with or even had an edge on, now they can't even compete with them anymore. And here's an interesting fact. Yeah, for about 5, 10, 15 years after, they got that muscle memory, they'd be able to get back in shape pretty quick and get that off pretty quick and get healthy again. But at some point in time, they cross the line where now it will take them even longer to get back to the shape that they were in than it would somebody to get to that same shape that had never tried it before. Think about that. The mind is just like that, right? The culture is just like that. So, what these people who have sold you on these things, Democrats mostly, Margaret Sanger thing, they're actually trying to put you, us, all of us eventually, back into serfdom. Which goes to that museum today that I wanted to use their exhibits as receipts for a point in my discussion. To prove to you that Native Americans were actually at the top of the bell curve one time, a cultural demographic that's now at the bottom. And 5 years ago, I could have walked into that museum and that exhibit would be there. And the curators of that museum, the operators of that museum, that is a Native American owned and operated museum, would have been very proud of those things. And they would have pointed to that and be like, see what we're capable of. And today I walked in that museum, and within a few years' time, all that stuff was gone. There was some pottery there, some pretty art and stuff like that, and some oral tradition, but it was all gentrified. It never really got down into the nitty-gritty of that history and that proof and that evidence and stand there and make you. It was all an emotional experience. Even their cultures are being erased from them. And somebody like me who just happens to have it in his mind because he's learned it and seen it before, we're the only remnants left of that. What happens when I die? And I saw and learned that before, but now I'm gone, see? And didn't get I don't feel like I've had an ample opportunity to pass that bit of knowledge and experience on to the next, right? That's how you get into a dark age. That's the road to serfdom, the road to slavery. And once all of us are on that bell curve at the same spot, because as Dr. Chuck Missler said many years ago, our education system, our news, has been purposely managed and edited and dumbed down. This has been going on for several decades now. I've been alive for almost 50 years. And I've been to school and I've seen a decline just from the time I walked into the schoolroom until now. Can't imagine the decline from before then. Oh yes, we have more advanced technology. So we say. It's fine-tuned technology. I remember our discussion about 4 weeks ago. We talked about how many of the things we enjoy today were invented somewhere between 1860 and 1950. All of it. Jet plane. It was invented by two contemporary but separate working scientists, one in Great Britain, the other in Germany. One developed the axial flow, the other one developed the centrifugal flow turbojet engine, which eventually we got the turbofan out of. That was invented in the 1930s. It was thought up in the 1920s. The device I'm using to talk to you on today, the cell phone, now obviously uses it's a digital device, but it's a digital signal modulated onto an analog carrier. That's a transceiver. It's a radio telephone. The radio telephone was invented during World War II. It's called the walkie-talkie. All we did was we took what Alan Turing invented in 1941 when he invented a digital computer to try to decode the Enigma machine of the Germans, and we used that binary code to configure images, sound, and record stuff. And now, using this telephone, this cell phone, there's a modem in it that modulates that digital information onto a radio carrier wave. All of that was invented before then. We've just taken it and combined it. So, all those people, and most of the people who did this, okay, yeah, Turing had his college degree, but most of the people who designed this stuff, the original versions of it, never went to college. They did it with high school diplomas or less, right? So that points to how much have we lost since then in education and information. Right? Worth thinking about. Really is. And let's put all the white people, all the black people, all the Native American people, all the Hispanic people, all the Arab people, all the Jewish people in this country today, all of us, the whole population of this country today, on the IQ bell curve, and compare it to an aggregate of the population as far as IQ scores from 1940. How about this? When the Wright brothers invented the airplane. Let's take 1900 to 1903. Two bicycle mechanics invented everything we know, the original basics of everything we know about avionics, except for jet technology, which was invented 20 years after them. But all the rest of it, right? They invented that as bicycle mechanics. Bicycle mechanics with high school diplomas from 1899 to 1903. Did all the math, everything, by themselves. As bicycle mechanics with high school diplomas. How much have we lost, really? Let's take an average high school graduate today. Oh, and they invented the wind tunnel too, because they had to have the wind tunnel to define the shape of the wing using hacksaw blades that they bent into different forms and stuff like that, to see how they could get the most lift with the least amount of drag, most lift with the lowest coefficient of drag. This is like calculate, and they did it by hand, all of it, and in their head. So the average high school graduate today couldn't even come close to that. So where on the bell curve would we test as an aggregate population today compared to the aggregate population of that day? I'll bet you that even black people under that period of time, under the darkest days of Jim Crow, just by themselves as an aggregate, would probably test higher on the bell curve than the aggregate American population as a whole today. So, what do we do to fix it? I already told you the answer to that. You have to get back to what works. Blood, sweat, tears, balance, family, God. And that is the end of my discussion today. This is AL-BINO, signing out.